Hello, and welcome to Gutenberg for Site Administrators. My name is Brian DeConnick, and I work for OIT Design and Web Services in the Office of Information Technology. Joining me here today are a few of my coworkers, Lauren and Miles, and then I think Jen might be watching too. Miles is going to take over in the second half of the presentation. Miles, do you want to say hi?
Hi.
There he is. So Miles is going to take over in the second half of the presentation, but I'm going to run through the first half. You can follow along either just in the video or at this link for the slides, go.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg-admin. And I'll share that link, or we'll share that link at the end of the presentation as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Sorry, didn't have my keyboard focus in the right place. All right, so let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about Gutenberg. We're going to start with the what, why, and when of Gutenberg and how it fits into the future of WordPress. We're going to meet the new editor, and I'll give you a chance to play with it on your own. We're going to talk about how users are going to react when they see this new editor. Since you're all site administrators, that's going to be probably very important to you. We're going to talk about what happens when you upgrade and your options for deciding how to upgrade and when to upgrade. And then finally, we're going to talk about some of the cool things you can do with Gutenberg in this new editor and other ways that we can sort of extend WordPress now that Gutenberg is available. If you've never done a YouTube Live workshop with OIT before, the way we do questions and answers, just below the video, there's a Q&A document linked. It's a Go link. So if you click on that, that should take you to a Google Doc. Just so you know, there's a little bit of a delay between what I'm saying and when you hear it. And then there's going to be a little bit of a delay between when you type it and when one of us sees what you've typed. So please be patient with us. If we don't see your question right away, somebody will see it, and we'll try to answer as soon as possible. But as we go through, please feel free to jump in with questions whenever you want. While I'm talking, Miles is going to interrupt me if there are any good questions, or not good questions, any questions, and I will do the same for him while he's talking. All right, so let's get to it. So you're probably wondering, what's the big deal? And so what is Gutenberg and why are we all here today? If you've used WordPress, which I assume you have if you're a site administrator, this is very familiar to you. This is the classic visual editor in WordPress. This is the editor that we've been using in WordPress for about 12 years. So that's a long time. That's a long time for us and for our users to get used to a certain sort of way things are. The visual editor is great, or the classic editor is great, except when maybe it's not so great. And so just to sort of highlight that, it's very easy in the classic editor to build simple pages. It's very dependable and reliable, and it gives you a good WYSIWYG experience. But it's not very easy to build complex pages, interesting page layouts that are more than just one column of text and some images. Sometimes it feels a little outdated and clunky, and that gets back to it was originally written 12 years ago, and it hasn't had any major changes since then. And with some of the ways that we've been changing WordPress over the years, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, has turned into what you see is not necessarily what you get, depending on several different factors. I was very proud of that WYSIWYG when I came up with that, so I hope everybody is getting a little chuckle out of that. It was really hard to talk about this and not have any audience reaction at all, so I don't really know if you're laughing or not. All right, now I'm just going to talk to myself. Okay, let's move on. So the classic editor is great except when it's not. So let's see an illustration of that. The classic editor is really good at taking a simple page and turning it into a simple page. So off to the left-hand side, we have just text, an image, a heading, some rich text like bold text and links, things like that. And when you publish, you end up with exactly what you expect to see. Um, exactly what you typed into the classic editor is exactly what you see on the front end of your site. So that's great, but we don't just want pages that are super simple, one column of text. We want things that are a little more interesting a lot of the time. So here we have a mock-up of a page. It's got this banner across the top with an image and then an icon and some text all in a gray box. We've got two columns underneath and another icon and some different fonts. And it's not really clear how you do that in the classic editor. There's not a button that says, give me an icon formatted like this. Or, there's not an obvious, add media to insert something that's not just an image. So this is sort of holding back WordPress. This is something that we've all been trying to come up with ways of solving this problem. And there are a lot of ways that we solve this problem. So here we have 4 little snippets of screenshots. You might be familiar with shortcodes, sort of the top left. Uh, in the middle, we have shortcake powered shortcodes, which is something that our office in OIT has been working on a lot over the last couple of years, where shortcodes are generated using an insert post element form, and that determines what the parameters are for the shortcode. Off to the right-hand side is a screenshot snippet from an advanced custom field. You're probably very familiar with that if your site has been originally built by an outside vendor or by University Communications or sometimes even by our group. And then down in the left-hand bottom corner is a screenshot from a simple free page building plugin. And all of these work, like they're all very successful, useful ways of making the classic editor do more than what it was originally designed to do, but they're all kind of clunky. They're all sort of weird solutions that don't make sense. And coming from this from the perspective of somebody who does a lot of training for WordPress users on campus, since everybody's site might look a little different, since everybody's using some different way of making the classic editor do what they want it to do, it's really hard to train on this. Every time we talk about WordPress, we have to say, well, on your site, it might look different and things like that. So this is a stumbling block. And meanwhile, as WordPress has been coming up with all these different ways of solving this problem and jamming more things into the classic editor, the rest of the web has been moving on. So here we have 3 screenshots from popular web publishing platforms, Medium, Wix, and Squarespace. And each of these is a very clean layout. With the Wix one, you see when text is highlighted, a contextual menu pops up, and when text isn't highlighted, that menu goes away. With Medium, you have these very simple buttons across the bottom, and otherwise it's a very clean white space editing experience. And then with Squarespace, there's a clear button that you push that opens up this menu of things that you can stick into a page. And this is sort of where web publishing tools have been going, and WordPress just hasn't been keeping up. Now, compared to these other tools, WordPress is still better. It's a more flexible tool and it's enterprise ready. Like we can do a lot of things for NC State with WordPress that we can't do with tools like Medium or Wix or Squarespace. But these newcomers still have something that they can really offer. And as a content creator, as somebody who's creating a page in a website, it is such a great experience. It's a modern, clean user interface where you really have a lot of control over what you're putting in, and there's no mystery. There's no, I think I'm going to do this, and we'll see what it looks like on the other side. So it's time for WordPress to move on too. And so a little over a year ago, in January 2017, Matt Mullenweg, who is the person who created the first version of WordPress, and he's the sort of the design and development lead for the WordPress Foundation. He still sort of sets the tone and the direction for this massive open source project that is WordPress. He announced last January that WordPress would be working toward building a new post and page building experience that would make creating rich posts effortless. And he said something about these blocks, this sort of new concept of block that would make it easy to do all the things that we've been doing with all these other solutions we've come up with. And that sounds great. And a year and a little bit later, we've got it. Looks like there's a minor formatting issue here, cut off a little text, but we've got it. It's called Gutenberg is the new editor, and it's going to be the new default editor in WordPress version 5.0. So you're probably wondering right now, when is this going to be something that I see on my site? We'll talk a little more about the upgrade scenarios that you might consider later on in the presentation. But if you're looking for a firm date, can't really help you with that. WordPress 5.0 will probably be released sometime between April and July. That's what we're estimating. So when Matt Mullenweg when Matt Mullenweg gave a big update on the progress of Gutenberg this past December, he said he thought it would be ready by April. It's not really clear if ready is the same thing as released and everybody's upgrading to it, or if ready means ready in April and it comes out in May or June after a little bit more testing or something like that. It's sort of unclear what that means. So for you as a site administrator, it's definitely helpful to think in terms of what happens if WordPress 5.0 is released on April 1st. What is my plan? How do I move forward? And what do I need to do between now and then? So with that in mind, let's meet the new editor. Rather than just talking about it in vague terms, let's actually dig in and see what it looks like. So first, a disclaimer. Gutenberg is an evolving tool. It's, for the most part, sort of settled on certain design conventions, but they're tweaking the user interface every time they release a new update to it, every time they make progress on it. And so between now and when it is merged into WordPress with WordPress 5.0, there might be some changes. And so what you see in these slides may not be exactly what ends up on your site. But it's going to be pretty close. I think this is still going to be a very useful presentation for you. So this is Gutenberg. This is what it looks like out of the box. It's a very clean and simple interface. And hopefully some of it will look sort of familiar after seeing those screenshots of things like Medium and Wix and Squarespace. You'll notice that little plus button that's underneath the first paragraph of text. That was actually removed in one of the recent releases of Gutenberg, and they're handling that button a little bit differently now. And that just gets to this question of Gutenberg as an evolving tool. Things are changing a little bit as we move forward. And so, what you see today may not be exactly what you see on your website. So Gutenberg interacts with the WP posts table in the database through the REST API. And if you're not a developer, for the most part, that doesn't mean anything to you. What is important is that your web host needs to allow your WordPress installation to send put requests through the REST API. We ran into this as an issue. Originally, OIT hosting was blocking put requests. OIT hosting, so hosted WordPress, cPanel hosting, things like that should all be taken care of. If you use OIT for your web hosting, that's not something you need to worry about. If you use some other hosting provider on campus, or you host off campus through some sort of external vendor, now's a good time to talk to them about making sure put requests are allowed. So in Gutenberg, everything is a block. That's that word that Matt Mullenweg said was going to replace all these other things. As you write your posts and pages, everything you write gets turned into blocks. And in particular, each paragraph is its own block. So if you have 3 paragraphs in a row, you have 3 blocks. Each bulleted list is a block. So the bulleted items are not individual blocks, but the list as a whole is a block. Each heading is a block, and so on and so forth. What that means is going to hopefully become more clear as we move on, but you can see in the screenshot here, there is a gray line, gray box surrounding that paragraph. That's the paragraph that's in focus. And also notice you got those little up and down arrows to the left-hand side that will let you move a block up and down through the poster page that you're editing. And then you have 3 buttons on the side that we'll be seeing in just a moment. So just to reinforce the idea that everything is a block, it's not just text, it's not just lists or headings, it's anything and everything you want to add to your poster or page, it gets added as a block. So here's part of the block menu screenshotted out. These are many but not all of the blocks that are available, and you have a lot of rich and dynamic content here too. Images and video and different types of formatting text, quotes and verse and things like that. You have buttons and text columns. You have all these different options that are available to you, and each one is a different type of block and gets added as separate blocks. So we talked about that plus button earlier. That plus button is how you add a new block to your poster page. For the most part, you'll see that plus button up in the top left-hand corner, and then occasionally that plus button will show up other places in your poster page as you're editing it. And I'll show you some examples of that when we get into some hands-on activities with the editor. And then when you click that plus button, it opens up this menu, and you click on the type of block that you want to use, and that will be inserted into your poster page. Sometimes it gets inserted at the end, and you have to move it up using those little arrows that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes it will be inserted after the block that currently has focus. So if you have a paragraph that's currently in focus and you add an image, that image will be inserted immediately after that paragraph. This is something that's sort of new. It was introduced in a very recent version of Gutenberg, and it's still kind of rough, still kind of experimental. Some blocks can be nested inside of other blocks. So where that's going to be really useful is with things like multi-column layouts. So you can have a column block that will have 2 regions inside of it, and then you can have other blocks fit into those regions. So here I have just a very simple 2-column and 3-column layout. You can insert text, you can insert images, or various other types of blocks. I did say this is experimental and a little rough. It did not take very long to discover that you can have columns inside of columns inside of columns inside of columns. As far as I understand it, blockception is going to be removed in future versions of Gutenberg. But this gets at Gutenberg as an evolving tool. And so what you see today may end up changing a little bit over the course of its continued development. So I mentioned this little 3-dot button that's off to the right-hand side of every block. So that opens up block options, and each block has different options depending on what kind of a block it is. So here we have a paragraph block, and as you click on those 3 buttons, you see a couple of things that stand out. First, you can remove the block or convert it to a reusable block. A reusable block is a block where the content of that block is saved, and you can drop that anywhere else you want to put it. So if you have a couple of paragraphs of text or something like that that you know you're going to need to include on 10 different pages on your website, it's one way of not having to recreate it or copy paste it or something like that. You save it as a reusable block, and then you insert it into each page. Certain blocks can also be transformed into other blocks. So you see turn into heading, turn into list, turn into pre-formatted, and so on. That gives you options for taking the content in this block and turning it into another type of block without losing any of that content. So if you start typing a paragraph and then you realize, no, this would be better as a heading, you don't have to remove that block and then add a heading block. You can just turn it into a heading. I skipped over the first item in that menu, Show Advanced Settings, which we will see right here. So if you click Show Advanced Settings, that will open up this right-hand sidebar. The advanced settings are, again, different for every block, depending on what a block is allowed to do, what has been coded to do. So here we have a paragraph block that has options like adding a drop cap, so a large first letter at the beginning of the paragraph. You can adjust the font size. You can change the background color or the text color. Please do not choose a text color that is illegible. But one of the nice things about Gutenberg is that if you have a yellow font on a light gray background and it's just impossible to read, Gutenberg will detect it if it's not, if it doesn't meet certain accessibility requirements, and it won't stop you from doing that, but it will give you a message asking you to please reconsider the choice you're making. So like I said, every type of block has different settings available to it. And it says here, every block has at least one advanced setting. After we made this slide, we actually realized it's possible to make a block that doesn't have any advanced settings, but most blocks will have at least one setting option, and that is to add a custom CSS class. So if you have a CSS class in your theme that you want to apply to certain things, that's something that's very straightforward and easy to do. That's just an advanced setting for that block. So all of this is different. All of this is new. The next question is, how are my users going to react? And that's really important because while I'm pretty excited about Gutenberg, and I'm excited about the things that it'll let us do in terms of complex page layouts and dynamic content, I also know that our team supports hundreds and I mean in some environments thousands of WordPress users, and one day they're going to open up WordPress and see it all looks different, and I'm a little concerned about how they're going to react. So how are they going to react? We conducted some campus Gutenberg user testing in late January. For the most part, we were working with some power users who already knew WordPress pretty well. There were a few people who were more WordPress newbies who were familiar with um, HTML or other content management systems or things like that, but didn't really know WordPress as well. Um, and so for each of these users, we gave them about 30 minutes to recreate some pages. We asked them to talk through it. We recorded all of their sessions so we could go back and review and learn more from their testing sessions. And we wrote a long blog post sort of outlining everything we learned from it at that Go link right there. I think it's probably worth your time, not just because I spent a lot of time writing the blog post, but because I think we learned some really interesting things, and I'm going to summarize some of those things right now. So the first thing that stands out is that nobody knows what to call anything or where anything is. That kind of makes sense. Everything's been moved around. And then the new editor is big on iconography and has comparatively less text. So we have this little three dot menu that opens up options for your block. One user who we tested, here's how he described it. He said, I clicked on the little, and then he paused and said, mini hamburger options thing looking over here. And I don't think I would describe three dots as a mini hamburger, but that's how he described it. And I think it's not a bad description. The hamburger menu of three lines on top of each other. This is sort of the condensed version of that. But it sort of underlines how much users are going to be uncertain of how to describe things, and how, as somebody who supports users, you might run into a little bit of confusion. You might need to go back and forth a little bit to figure out what are you looking at, and here's what I call it, here's what you should call it too, sort of thing. It's also not always clear when to choose which block. So for example, if you gave a user an exercise to recreate this gray box right up here, where we have the drop cap, where we have text, and it's in this gray background box, there are a couple of different options that users might try. Quote and pull quote, which are two different blocks and do slightly different things. Verse, which is actually for writing poetry, where it respects your extra white space or line breaks. I'm not expecting that to come up very often on most departmental websites at NC State, but you never know. And then just the regular paragraph block. And so the correct answer is that that's just a regular paragraph block. That's a paragraph block that then, using the advanced block options, advanced block settings, you can add the background color, you can add the block or the drop cap, and then you can change the font size to be what you want it to be. That's not immediately obvious to somebody who's never done this before and hasn't gotten to know the editor. And so, just to really emphasize this, sometimes your users are going to try one block and really need to use a different block. So here's another actual quote from our user testing. The user sort of working through trying to figure out what block to choose. He was saying image, add a thingy, add embed thingy, because he didn't really know what to call it. And so, just as an example here, we have image, we have video, and we have YouTube. So if you if you've been asked to insert a YouTube embed into a page or a post, the correct answer is to use the YouTube block, where you paste in your YouTube URL and it embeds it for you. You might also try the image block, because a lot of the time in sort of classic editor WordPress land, a lot of things are beneath the add media gallery, or rather add media button, where you can add an image or you can add a gallery, or in some cases might be set up to add more things than just that. You might also think to use the video block because you're adding a YouTube video, but the video block is looking for a URL to a video file in your media library, not a URL to video for a video embed. And so each of these blocks does slightly different things, and that's something that you learn with experience or with somebody giving you a little bit of guidance, but that leads to some questions and some confusion. We also noticed that most of our users didn't notice the advanced block settings on the right-hand side without getting a hint from us. So again, a quote from one of our users: "This is what I keep forgetting about, the right-hand sidebar." And it kind of makes sense that they'd forget about that. When you think about classic WordPress as we've been using it for the last 12 years, all of your content editing has been happening in one place, in the center column of the classic editor. And any formatting that you're doing to the content is in the toolbar that goes across the top. You don't really have to think about all the stuff on the right-hand side in the sidebar until you're ready to publish, until you're deciding what category or tag to add to your post, until you're deciding to preview it or push the publish button or something like that. In Gutenberg, as you're formatting your blocks, you have these new options that are off to the right-hand side that you need to be aware of. The other question, again, when do you need a new type of a block, or when do you just customize the block that you have? I got at this a little bit earlier, but here's just an example. Here are two blocks. One looks very different from the other, but they are in fact the same type of a block. They're both paragraph blocks. They've just been edited or customized using the advanced block options. And again, this is something that just comes with experience. As you work in Gutenberg longer, you start to get some intuition about what can be done with block options and what requires a new block, a new type of block, but it's confusing for a new user. And then this is another thing that's a little confusing for a new user too. Those advanced settings on the right-hand side, do they change the whole block? Do they format the whole block, or do they only format selected text? So we saw a lot of people highlighting just a few words and then trying to adjust the font size the same way that you would highlight just a few words and make them bold or something like that. And for bold and italics and things like that, that still works. If you highlight them and then click the bold-faced B button, it still makes just the highlighted text bold. But if you highlight the text and adjust the font size for the advanced settings for the block, that will change the font size for the entire block. So all of these are not showstoppers. They're relatively minor issues that you can sort of work through with a lot of trial and error. And the users that we were working with, the users we were testing, it took them probably about 20 minutes to figure things out. If you support a lot of users, if you have a lot of people working on your website, you can sort of start to do the math of n number of users times 20 minutes of trial and error. How many support tickets or how many questions or how many confused stares are you going to get? And so that's that's a thing you need to be aware of. One other thing that we sort of discovered that I think is interesting is we sort of anticipated power users would have more trouble than users who are new to WordPress. Um, my colleague Jen, she likens it to when Microsoft Word went from having everything in drop-down menus across the top to having the ribbon across the top of different options, that power users who already knew all of their keyboard shortcuts and knew exactly where everything was and mostly operated on muscle memory, that they would get that with Microsoft Word, they were the ones who had the most trouble with the ribbon when it came out, and that and that new users were able to figure things out pretty quickly. So that's kind of what we expected with Gutenberg, but that's not what we saw. The people who had a lot of experience in WordPress were able to figure things out faster than people who were coming in totally fresh. I think there's ongoing user testing with the Gutenberg development team to try to make things go a little smoother for new users, but that's something to be aware of too. Not all of your users will come in with the same set of assumptions or the same sort of ideas about what they can and can't do with WordPress, and that's going to inform how long it takes for them to get used to the new editor. So as you're supporting the other users on your site, here are a couple of things we recommend. First, tell your users that it's coming before it happens. We're going to talk a little bit about how upgrading is going to work, but what's going to be most helpful is if you start informing and educating your users basically as soon as possible that there is a change that's coming and this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be a lot easier to get them on board with it and help train them if it's not a total surprise. The next thing you can do is give your users maybe a 30-minute guided tour. And if that's not practical, encourage them to sign up for our other workshop that we're teaching, Gutenberg for Content Creators. You can sign up for that now in Reporter. And then finally, we have created a test site at oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg, where you can create a practice site and work with that. And we're going to be looking at that in just a moment. But that's a good place for people to sort of go figure out how the new editor works, get the hang of it before they all of a sudden get dropped into something new. And then just to sort of reiterate what we were talking about earlier, here are some helpful hints that you're going to be giving your users all the time. Don't forget to look at the advanced settings on the right and try a different block. Those two things are probably going to solve most issues that your users are going to encounter as they're creating new content. Um, excuse me. So, with all of that said, let's get to know Gutenberg. So we have two links here for you now. The second one you should just save for later. That's the link I gave just a moment ago to the campus test environment, where you can create your own Gutenberg site and get to know it and save your content. The first one is just sort of a public sandbox. You don't have to log in, and you'll be taken directly to a Gutenberg editor that's pre-populated with some content. Any changes that you make will not be saved, so don't plan on saving anything important there. It's just a place where you can get to know the new editor and do a quick demo if you want to show another user what it looks like. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the quick page. So here is the new editor. On the left-hand side, we have the same menu that you would normally have in WordPress. Just all of the options for managing your theme and plugins and things like that have been hidden. But you would have everything that you would normally have right here. Across the top, we have this plus button right here. That's to add a new block, and I'll go ahead and click it. And we have all of our blocks arranged down here. As you add more and more blocks, so they fall into different categories. Across the top, you've got your recent blocks that you've used. You've got your blocks, which is not a super helpful heading, but that's just a list of all of the blocks that are available, except for the embeds, which get their own section. So these are all of the different types of media from elsewhere on the web that you can insert into a page or a post. So for instance, YouTube or Twitter feed or a Twitter post, and so on. And then you have your save blocks, and this is where the reusable blocks that I mentioned earlier would come in. As you add more and more blocks to your site using plugins or things like that, or even just right now, since this is sort of an unwieldy list, you have this toolbar right up here where you can search for you can search for a type of a block. So if I'm looking for YouTube, I start to type U and it gives me the YouTube option. If I'm looking for an image, it gives me a couple of different image related things. Cover image, excuse me, excuse me. Cover image, which we'll see in a moment. Gallery, just a regular image. And then other embeds like Instagram and Flickr. So that's the block menu. We have an undo and a redo button right here. We have an information button right here, which gives us information about the page that we've created. So how many headings you have, how many paragraphs, how many just blocks are in there right now, and then a document outline. And as you click on each of these headings, it will jump you down the page to where that heading is. Excuse me, where that heading is in the editor. And then also a word count if you want to see how verbose you're being. So over to the right-hand side, we have more information about your poster page. So over here is where you would set things like visibility, if you want it to be password protected or not. As you can make changes, here's where you view your past revisions, you set your featured image, and so on and so forth. Things that should hopefully be very familiar from classic WordPress. And then your table of contents right here. So as I said, everything is a block. So here's your title and your permalink, which should be fairly familiar from the past. But once we move past the title. Here is an image as a block. You see this contextual menu that pops up across the top with options that are available for an image. Um, these options are available for the image type block, and so they show up for an image block. As you scroll down, you'll see things like a paragraph block here, and if we go to the three-dot menu and show advanced settings, we'll see that the font size has been changed, and I can drag it up or down to change it even more. I can add a drop cap like so, and I'll go ahead and give it a nice UNC blue background color. Except why would I ever do that? That's UNC blue. That's a terrible choice. So I'll go ahead and clear that out. You'll notice that the block menu is in the same place as this document menu. You can go back and forth between them. And then if you click out of a block, if it's not in focus, oh, lost I lost something. I'm going to try sharing that again. Can everybody still hear me? Uh-oh. Hi, everybody. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you, Brian. Yes, and I am getting reports that people can't hear you.
Okay.
The Q&A document, but you did. It looks like you did disappear for a second there.
Okay. So let's try sharing my screen again. Sorry about that, everybody. Okay. Can you see my screen?
We're getting a
All right.
no. We cannot see the screen.
All right. So I am going to try to figure this out. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. All right. Let's see. Well, this is fun. I'm not sure why it's not letting me share my screen anymore. Let me try one other thing. So the good news is that this is a problem with YouTube Live and not with WordPress. WordPress is working great. So when this happens to your website, or when Gutenberg is added to your website, it's not.
All right. Apparently, Brian is having more technical difficulties, and his browser has crashed on him. So I am going to start talking to you all. I am going to see if I can't pick up where Brian left off and share my screen.
Hi, everybody. I am back, I think.
Oh, Brian's back.
All right. So let me try that again. Give me 1 second. Sorry about the technical issues.
Brian, I will say that you are showing up as Brian and not OIT Design.
I think that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. And then all right, so I'm going to try screen sharing again. And here we go. All right, can everybody see the demo Gutenberg editor? Okay, so as I was saying, I added UNC Blue and then everything went wrong. So let that be a lesson to everybody. All right,
Hey, Brian, we're not actually getting the full video. I think we're seeing Lauren's icon as the video.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Let's see what I can do about that. Hang on. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I assume you still can't see the slides or the whole screen. Miles?
Yes, that looks like it's correct, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to... Okay. And let's try again. Okay. How about now? Can everybody see the screen that I'm sharing?
I don't think so.
Okay. How about now? How's everybody doing?
I think we have it now.
All right. So thank you, everybody. Sorry that happened. Like I was saying, this is a YouTube issue, not a WordPress issue. So it's not our fault. All right. So I was showing off some different block options. Take a few minutes to get to know the editor at oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg/quick. Hopefully you've been doing that as we've been fumbling our way through how YouTube works. I do want to show off a couple of things. So here we have a cover image block. So this is a new block that's introduced in Gutenberg and WordPress 5.0. That's not really something you've been able to do in classic WordPress editor world in the past, and that's put actual text on top of an image. You also have the option for dimming the background. And let's bring it back up a little bit. As with anything that involves text on an image, please be aware of color contrast and making sure that your text is legible. But this is something that gives a lot of power and a lot of options for how you're presenting sort of flashier, more impressive, visually impressive things on your web page. I do also want to show off down here the gallery block. So here's a gallery. The classic WordPress editor has had galleries as an option for some time, but it's never really been implemented very well as far as I'm concerned. Here we have a gallery as a block that gives you a lot more, I think a much better experience. So when I inserted these 3 images into a gallery, it was auto-inserted on its own in this arrangement. And if I say I only want 2 columns instead of 3 columns, it will sort of intelligently resize things so that it continues to look good. And then if I drop down to 1 column or so on, and if I want to add another image, I have this little plus button right here, and that opens up a image selection dialog. So this is Gutenberg. I guess I also want to point out, since this may come up from time to time, many of you may rely on editing HTML code from time to time. You should probably be careful about that because Gutenberg is a little more picky about the HTML that it sees, but you still have some options to edit the HTML directly. So if I click on Edit as HTML here, that will let me edit the HTML for just the block that I'm looking at. So let's go ahead and take it back. If you edit the HTML in a way that Gutenberg does not expect you to, so let's see if I can break Gutenberg. Edit as HTML, and if I turn my p tag here into, let's say, a blink tag, which you should never use, Gutenberg will notice that something doesn't quite look right, and it'll try to intelligently give you options. So it'll tell you to edit as HTML, or it'll tell you to convert to blocks, where it will try to match what you have there with blocks that it knows about. So if I click convert to blocks, it's successfully converted it back into a paragraph block. So every now and then you might see that kind of a message come up. Something doesn't look right, and then it will try to intelligently take care of that. So with all of that said, I'm going to turn things over to Miles, who's going to take us through a little bit more of the presentation. We lost a little time with the YouTube mishap, so Miles is going to have the harder job, but I believe in him.
Thank you.
So let me just pull up the slides.
So yeah, in the second half, we're going to start talking about the options for upgrading and what that's going to look like for your users and how that's going to happen when the blocks, when you actually decide that you want to upgrade. So yeah, what happens when you upgrade? I'm sure you're all wondering. Of course, this is a big change for WordPress as a whole, and you certainly don't want a situation where you're having to go back through and edit everything when you upgrade to Gutenberg. But fortunately, a lot of things are still going to continue to work. Most of the things that you consider WordPress, the plugins, the settings screen, a lot of the admin experience is going to remain the same. WordPress is really just focused on the editor that you see inside the posts and pages, things like adding images, adding media, managing users and the settings. That's all going to stay the same. You don't have to worry about that radically changing when Gutenberg becomes a part of your site. Now, there may be plugins you're having that do affect that editing experience, and those may not necessarily be compatible with WordPress. WordPress is working on a Gutenberg plugin compatibility database where they're going to try and go through and identify the plugins that people are using and say, hey, this one's good to go. This one is not going to work so well. So, by the time that Gutenberg is really ready for prime time, there should be a good list of the plugins, be able to go through there and find out which of your plugins have been updated to work with Gutenberg, which ones should work fine anyways, or which ones you may want to start looking at a replacement for if it's not compatible with Gutenberg that has been updated in a while. That's also a thing you can volunteer for if you want to sort of communicate directly with developers and ensure that the features you like about a plugin are still going to work after Gutenberg. You can do that. Now, the things that are changing in a big way are the posts and pages editor, as well as any sort of custom post type that you might have added by a plugin or a theme. And so that might be, Gravity Forms or Events Calendar or any sort of thing that's been added by a plugin. And also if you are using plugins that change the content editing experience. And that's a real big one. It's probably going to be the biggest issue that you're going to run into because a lot of people are sort of using those plugins that are, sort of enhancing the page building experience or post editing experience. And so that underlying technology is changing in a big way. And so those plugins will have to also be updated to make sure that they fit in with this new way. And so if Brian talked earlier about the different ways that we had sort of, worked around the limitations of the classic editor, whether they're shortcodes, page builder, or advanced custom fields. And so those each are sort of going to have a different way that they will transition to Gutenberg. And that's really going to be the biggest factor in how much work you're going to have upgrading to Gutenberg. If you are using a very vanilla installation of WordPress, it's going to be a lot easier than if you've got a lot of things that are editing or changing the content editing experience. So yeah, given sort of 4 general categories of how your site might be set up, vanilla WordPress with not much going on. A lot of people on campus, especially the sites that we build, are using shortcodes with Shortcake to make that happen. A lot of other people might be using advanced custom fields. And there's other people using things like Visual Composer or Divi that are radically editing the page editing experience. So for vanilla WordPress, pretty much it's going to be easy. When you upgrade to Gutenberg, it's going to take all of your content from the classic editor and it's going to put it in a classic block. So you can see that the paragraphs and the block quotes, those regular HTML elements, are just sort of going to go into this one classic block. So it's going to be pretty easy for situations like that. There's not going to be much change, but those classic blocks, it is sort of just a big wrapper for all the HTML in there. So it means you're not going to be able to add other blocks inside the classic blocks. But WordPress has already sort of developed a solution for that. And so if you have something, it will automatically be converted to a classic block. But then from that classic block, you can have it converted to blocks, which will mean that it'll break out those, paragraphs or those images or, like a block quote into their own blocks, which is going to make it easier to then work within Gutenberg, to add other blocks in the midst of there or get those advanced settings that the other regular blocks have. And you can see an example of that working here, where it's going to try and do its best to figure out what blocks they should go into. If you have a lot of complicated layout, it may not do it perfectly. It might sort of put everything it doesn't understand in a custom HTML block. Worst case scenario, it might really freak out at you, but it still can probably be able to put everything inside an HTML block. But hopefully, if you've been using good markup, it's going to be able to understand that and put it into their individual blocks. So yeah, it should be a smooth upgrade. You may have other plugins that interact with the editing experience if you have a mostly vanilla site. And so those may be, again, it's a situation where you're going to want to check into the plugin compatibility database to see if anything you're using is going to affect it. But if you're mostly using basic WordPress, everything should be pretty easy. Now, another big group is the sites with shortcodes. And this is one of the big things we've been thinking about. It's certainly one that we are going to be following. But right now, when you bring stuff into that classic editor, those shortcodes are going to continue to work fine. They're going to maybe look a little weird, and they may preview sort of with some wonkiness. And we're trying to do some stuff with our plugins to clean up the display. Hopefully, if you're using shortcodes from other plugin developers, those will they'll do the same to make it work better with Gutenberg. But straight into the classic block, they will be sort of visible. And then when it breaks them out into blocks, though, it's going to turn them into their own shortcode block, which is going to mean that that display no longer works. But you'll be able to move them around like blocks. You'll just have to edit the raw shortcode if you were using something like Shortcode UI. That may be a little different, but you still will have the shortcodes working on the front end. Everything will be how you expect it. The people who make the block preview shortcake, they are working on compatibility with Gutenberg, so we may see that those renders end up working fine with Gutenberg so that you don't have to edit the raw shortcode. But that sort of depends on them. But definitely, if you're using the NC State Shortcodes plugin on your site, upgrade that, because we're going to be including some fixes to sort of make it work better with Gutenberg. If you have been using your own shortcodes, you may need to fix those. Take a look at how they're rendering inside the editor. Everything will still continue to work on the front end, but you want to make sure that it's a nice experience for your users. And so you may want to play around with there, make sure it works well with the Gutenberg editor. Now, another big group of people is the sites with advanced custom fields. So what a lot of the situation with this is where you've taken the content, the regular classic editor, away from these templates automatically, and people just use the advanced custom fields to bring all content in to sort of be able to do modular stuff. And so the idea behind block is actually kind of similar to this, where you've got these little repeatable elements you can use. But the thing about that is ACF stores all that stuff in custom post meta. And so that's not going to be automatically loaded in the Gutenberg editor, because the Gutenberg editor only sees the post content, not the post meta. But the Gutenberg editor will recognize that there should be meta boxes there. And so we'll display those meta boxes below the editor itself. And so you'll be able to see and update that information. But it's not going to be in the main Gutenberg editor. And if you try and add new blocks, it's going to add them inside the main content editor up at the top there. And you're not going to have them be able to interact with your ACF content and those blocks. And that may confuse users, especially because they see this nice plus button and they're going to try and add blocks with that. And it's not going to go in the midst of the other content, especially if you're using a template that ignores the content totally in favor of just the advanced custom field stuff. So the front end won't break, but the editor is going to be more confusing. Talk to your developer. It may mean that your theme needs to be rewritten. Hopefully, if it's someone you have a contract with, they'll be able to update it for you. Worst case scenario, you may be looking at moving themes, but hopefully, we have a few themes that use advanced custom fields, and we're looking at some options that may be able to automatically convert. And so hopefully everyone on campus using one of our standard themes is going to be fine there. But definitely talk with your developer and see what their plans are for making advanced custom fields work with Gutenberg. Now, that last group, the sites with page building plugins, that is really a big question, and we'll just kind of have to see. That really depends on each of them. They sort of run the gamut from how involved that those developers are. You're really going to have to look at their plan individually. Things like Divi that has a subscription model and it's a big company, or Visual Composer, I have to imagine that they're working out a plan for Gutenberg compatibility. Other sites, like I think the Page Builder by SiteOrigin, their plan is just to disable Gutenberg which is not really a plan because it means you're going to be left behind, because you definitely do want to be upgrading with Gutenberg. And so you want to definitely look into who's making your page builder, what their plan is, and how that's going to look like in the future. And yeah, but it may be good. They may have some sort of system that's going to help sort of easily convert it over to Gutenberg, or they may not have a plan, and that could end up with some real troubles on the back end when Gutenberg launches. But again, everything on the front end of your site still should be fine, even if the back end gets crazy. So definitely you're going to need to do some homework. Look at the way you're building your site currently. Look at how you're changing your editing experience from the vanilla WordPress experience, and then sort of look at what you need to do accordingly from there. You know, if you're using not too much stuff, you may just need to check a couple plugins, make sure it's going to be compatible. If you are using advanced custom fields, that may mean a longer conversation with your developer, or you know, developers you have access to. If you're using a page building plugin, that may mean really having to rebuild your site. So definitely talk to your people and figure out what your plan is. We also, again, have office hours every Friday morning, and we'd be happy to look at your site with you and sort of get an understanding of what you have going on to help you sort of develop a plan to move forward converting to Gutenberg. So now, in case you're freaking out a little, there are a couple different options for upgrading. Option one is upgrade with WordPress 5.0. You can also get it early, or you can also delay your upgrading in the future. So with option one, basically that means that one day in the future, WordPress 5.0 is going to come out. You're going to hit that upgrade button as you're probably used to. But everything's going to radically change, and you are going to get the primetime version of Gutenberg. And by that point, we would expect all the bugs to be fixed. You don't have to do anything until then. You don't have to install any special plugins. Everything's just going to be fine. But again, definitely communicate with your users. If you have a lot of users on your sites, let them know that that's coming, because they may be very confused if they're not used to it and they wake up one day and just see Gutenberg there in their editor instead of what they're used to. And then option two, you can actually get Gutenberg early. So Gutenberg is available as a plugin on the WordPress plugin repository, which will enable it inside of your site. It will still let you use the classic editor, but for any posts and pages that you make, they're going to be turned into Gutenberg by default. But old pages, you can still use the classic editor with. You can also make new classic editor pages if you want to. And so this is a good option. If you have a lot of people using your site, you can sort of control when it actually happens. So if you know that you have some open time for you to work with your content creators and you want to go ahead and pull the trigger sooner than later, you know, because you may not know when WordPress 5.0 is going to come out. And so it may be beneficial to sort of be able to schedule your own time for when it happens. The downside, though, is that there's still some bugs that they're working out. Things may change. It's not entirely stable. And so you may see some weird behavior. But if it's a non-critical website and you have users that can kind of give feedback, and you know that you don't have too much crazy work going on with advanced custom fields or page building plugins, it may be a good option for you. And then you can sort of get people used to Gutenberg before it's sort of the only thing available. The option three would be to delay upgrading to Gutenberg. Right now, Gutenberg is a plugin, but then after Gutenberg launches, the classic editor itself is going to be a plugin. So you could, after Gutenberg 5.0 launches, install the classic editor plugin, and then either make it so Gutenberg is still just an option, or hide it entirely so that you just have the classic editor. So that'll be another plugin you can download. And this is an advantage that nothing's going to change. You know, all those things we talked about where your page building might break, new users have to learn new stuff. This sort of sidesteps that. But the disadvantage is that you're sort of going to be falling behind. Gutenberg really is a big change for WordPress, and it is the future of WordPress, and everything is sort of going to move into Gutenberg. So you may sort of avoid some troubles in the near term. If you're not ready for it, you want to schedule, that's fine. But eventually you're going to have to face moving to Gutenberg. The classic editor is going to be supported for a while, and that's a very sort of tenuous for a while. I would imagine throughout the rest of 2018 probably. But after that, it's hard to say. And so you can do it, but don't do it in, sort of just as a way to avoid Gutenberg. Only do it because you have a plan and you're just not enacting it yet. You won't know you have some time coming up in the future, and so you're not ready. So it'll buy you time, but you still need to have a plan because you will eventually have to move into Gutenberg. And in any case, again, make a plan, talk to your web support team. I can't emphasize that enough. You want to talk to the people who know about the way your theme is developed, talk to the people who use your website, and come up with a plan to make this upgrade process as seamless as possible. So let's talk about some things we can do with extending Gutenberg, because we don't have to do it the way it is by default. We can actually have a lot of options to customize it to our own liking. So yeah, there's a lot of scary stuff, but Gutenberg also gives us a lot of cool stuff that we would have been super hard to do in the classic editor. And so I'm really excited about it. I'm nervous about the change, but I'm really excited about all the cool stuff that we're going to be able to get to do once Gutenberg launches. So we are developing a plugin called NC State Blocks plugin, which will be available through Cthulhu. And we're working with University Communications to make sure it's branded, and the IT Accessibility Coordinator to make sure it meets branding guidelines and other teams on campus. And this is sort of our successor plugin to the NC State Shortcodes, which will hopefully provide a base for any NC State web presence to be able to have a set of branded, easy to use, and common blocks that will help you sort of easily build out a site and have it look really good. So here's some of the blocks that we currently have available. We've got panels like expanding FAQ panels working, alerts. We've got the major link. We have NC State styled recent posts. We're working on a call out block that'll be good for banner images. We're working on integration with a directory plugin, sysnews feed, a block that will be sort of a tutorial block and sort of point out helpful things for new users, and blocks that'll make it easy to add NC State or other icons. And then looking towards the future, we're going to have stuff that may be able to determine the relationship between blocks, where if you use one block, it may suggest a different block to come next to sort of help you easily build out layouts and sort of other sort of common block layouts that'll really make it easier for people who are not developers to be able to sort of take advantage of all these design options and make something really nice. Table of contents block. Maybe in the future we'll have a protected content block that will let you just hide, any blocks inside of it, or easily be able to add images from pack pics. And then the ultimate one is a block that's going to do Brian's laundry. So we're really excited about all the things these blocks will be able to do, especially when it means that Brian doesn't have to do his own laundry. So if you have an idea for a block, if you have something on your sites you're using now, and you want to make sure that it's in a block, let us know. We'd love to hear. We're in the process of developing this. So email us at oitdesign@ncsu.edu with your ideas for blocks, and it may just end up in our blocks plugin. You should also talk to your developer about theme styles. So Gutenberg adds its own styles for the front end of the site just to make sure that things look sort of pretty. And so it's possible that those may conflict with your default theme styles, or that your theme styles may need to be tweaked to work well with the CSS that Gutenberg is going to provide. Or you may need to edit the theme to disable those Gutenberg provided styles. So that's another thing you should definitely take a look at with your developer, or if you are the developer, take a look at how your CSS interacts with the Gutenberg CSS. And then also Gutenberg can load styles from your theme into the editor so that those blocks that you have will look close to what they look like on the front end, so that content creators get much closer to a real what you see is what you get experience if they add a block and it's a button And on the front end of your site, it's going to look like an NC State button with square edges and a red background. It should look like that. And we're sort of working on a basic Guten styles plugin that will add that basic functionality for the basic blocks to make them look NC State styled. This is just generic stuff. So you can see how on the left there is the basic Gutenberg styles. You know, things that look nice like rounded buttons that are cool but don't fly on our campus. We can convert that to use the right fonts, the right colors, and the right general branding and feel. And so that'll be available as a plugin on Cthulhu you can download. But you may want to look at extending to that or adding to that for your own sites. Also talk to your theme developer about wide align supports. So in the classic editor, we're used to sort of just align left, align center, align right. Gutenberg brings two more options, align wide and align full, which your theme can support. And basically this lets you have a container that the content inside is still like only as wide as your regular container, but it may allow the background to go all the way to the edge of the screen, or have an image that fills up the nice screen, which is kind of a cool effect. And so align wide goes all the way to the edges, and align full is just a little bit out of the regular container. But if you are able to add support for those different align options, you can do that for basically any block that has the alignment utility. And so it'll really sort of give your content creators a lot more options with how they're sort of creating pages and making them look really cool. Some blocks also include a color selector tool in the advanced settings, which is pretty handy to be able to add more design options. And you can also change the default colors those give you to university brand colors by editing your theme. And so that's definitely a thing you're going to want to do. You don't want people to be adding, you know, Duke blue or Carolina blue to their backgrounds. You can have that so automatically, even on the default blocks or any other blocks that you download with a plugin. If they use the color palette, it will automatically change those options to university branded colors. And so that's pretty handy and gives good extensibility. So even if you're downloading a plugin that had some blocks, you know, from somewhere on the internet that's not connected to NC State, you still are automatically having options to make that look NC State branded, which is always a good thing. You also have options to remove blocks that you don't want users to see. You know, like a couple places, there's some blocks that are a little bit confusing. And if you don't think people are going to use those, like if you don't think people are going to use the verse block because you don't have poetry, you can remove that block so it's not there to confuse people. You can also make sure that Gutenberg works with custom post types. You'll need to make sure that any custom post type is available in the REST API to make sure that Gutenberg can access it, because that's how it works. And so you'll want to do some stuff to make sure that everything is going to work seamlessly with Gutenberg. And you can also have block templates. Like right now you have page templates that mostly just kind of change the container for the content. But then once Gutenberg launches, you'll have a block template that basically can give, you know, tell users, oh, this template is going to have, you know, an image here and, you know, a paragraph here. And so you can pre-populate that with content. And so it makes it much easier to give people who may not be as experienced with WordPress, like a starter base to go from, if you can say, oh, hey, this page is going to need these things with a block template. So all of that to say, Gutenberg is a big deal. It is going to be really exciting. We're going to be able to do a lot of cool stuff. And I'm excited to see all the new stuff we're going to be able to do. But there's definitely going to be a period of transition that's going to require a plan. It's going to require good communication with you, your users, and your theme and plugin developers. So, you know, it behooves you really to take a good inventory of your site. You can get an idea of what you have, what that's going to look like in Gutenberg, what that transition is going to be. And it's also a good opportunity to just take a look through your plugins in general. Make sure that you're using stuff that's up to date. Make sure you're using stuff that is easy to use. And you're not using anything that's, you know, insecure or anything. So definitely good communication. Talk with your users. Let them know what's happening. Talk to your developers. Make sure that everything's going to still work with Gutenberg. Test it out. Familiarize yourself with it. understand sort of how it works so that when it does launch and people are using it, you can really be a resource to the people using your site. All right, so if you have any more questions, we still have 10 minutes here before the session technically ends. If you put stuff in the Q&A document, I'd be happy to answer them. Also, if you want to look back at these slides, you can go to go.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg-admin. So yeah, I'd love to hear your questions. If you want clarification with everything, with anything, we'd be happy to talk about that.
I just want to thank everybody also for being patient with us with our little technical mishap. If you do have anything that you want to see in Gutenberg that we sort of rushed through because my Chrome browser died on me, I'd be happy to go back and show you something or anything that you'd like to see.
Also, please fill out the evaluation of this course session. This is the first time I've actually done this course. And of course, Gutenberg is new. So if you felt like it was good, bad, terrible, you thought things could be different, let us know because we'd like to keep improving this class as Gutenberg gets closer to launch and we eventually merge it in with our main WordPress classes.
Yeah, so just a moment ago, if everybody's not in the Q&A document, Jen asked how everybody was feeling about it, and one response is that it's going to be great in the end, but you're going to have to check on a bunch of sites and plugins and probably answer a bunch of questions after the switch. And that's sort of where we are too. I think our team, we've taken it upon ourselves to learn as much about Gutenberg as possible and get into a position where we can help people on campus. But I mean, there's no getting around the fact that this is just a lot of work. There's a big change that's happening, and even if upgrading goes completely smoothly, all those users who have been seeing one thing for 12 years are going to have a moment of this is different and I'm scared. So I guess we're all in it together, um, and just remember that uh, our team in OIT is available for questions if you want to direct some questions to us. If you want to work with us to try to come up with good support strategies or things like that, we're very happy to talk with you and work with you and try to come up with a plan that works for everybody. So question with mod security rules and the put request issue that we mentioned at the beginning. If I have a standalone WordPress site in AFS, would I set this up, make a request, or other? We actually haven't done a lot of testing with anything hosted in AFS, so I think request to the help desk would be a good first step. Yeah, something into the OIT Web Services team to just verify that put requests will work in AFS lockers, and that should be all it takes. As I understand it, it's a relatively simple change for the mod security rules. It's just a change that we didn't know we had to make until we discovered that Gutenberg wasn't working for us. You're welcome. Um, so assuming nobody else has any questions, I guess we'll wrap things up. If you do think of a question, so I'm going to be sending out a follow-up message to everybody who signed up for this class, but also you can always reach out to us, oitdesign@ncsu.edu, or stop by our office hours, or if you see us walking down the street, just stop and accost us there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this broadcast. Thanks everybody for listening, and guten luck.
Yes, good luck. Thanks for coming.
For so much of the workshop. Good luck to everybody, and let us know if you need any help.